Hello, welcome back to the Just Transition Platform meeting. My name is Sigrid de Vries. I am the Secretary General for CLIPA, the European Association of Automotive Suppliers. We represent about 3,000 companies across Europe, all supplying the automotive manufacturers with those components and systems that make vehicles smart and safe and sustainable. And we represent about 1.7 million employees across Europe again in more than 14 automotive countries. I really have the honor of moderating this session today, along with a distinguished panel on a topic that is, of course, of utmost importance for many sectors, including automotive. And that topic is reskilling and future-proof jobs. The challenge here, of course, is capturing the opportunities and job creation as well to make this transition to climate neutrality a success, while also mitigating the negative consequences on employment that will also be there. So in other words, ensuring a fair and a just transition which avoids the unnecessary disruption of millions of livelihoods. We believe, and we hope also with this session today to change that the social dimension is underemphasized in the political discourse, and that's why this discussion also today is so important. I know it firsthand from working in the automotive industry, the impact that the transition is having on regions, on regional economies, on SMEs, on workers on the ground. An enormous impact in my sector alone. It concerns over 500,000 people in the near future. Having to look at the reskill, at upskill, and maybe finding an entirely different job because of the transition ongoing. Jobs are also created, of course, in the transition, but mostly before the steep decline in job that happens. And it often concerns, different skill sets, other companies, maybe other regions, and sometimes also other people. Other sectors face similar challenges, and we are here today to discuss the mechanisms that can help facilitate talent acquisition, also reskilling and upskilling of those working in declining and changing industries, and in the regions hardest hit by the transition, to enable them to work in growing and also in future-proofing the sectors. So with that, I would like to welcome our speakers today. I'll start with the first one, very important for setting the scene, Frank Seaburn-Thomas, Head of Unit at Fair, Green and Digital Transitions and Research at DG Employment, the European Commission. A few words about Frank, perhaps. He is in charge of policy development and analysis related to the employment and social dimensions of the twin green and digital transition. And he also links with the European Research and Innovation Programme, Horizon Europe. He's worked in different functions before in the European Commission, amongst those also in DG Grow and DG Markt, and always, I think, somehow related to employment and social analysis, also research and foresight. And before joining the Commission, he worked in reinsurance. He studied applied mathematics and economics in Hamburg and in Louvain-la-Neuve, and he holds a PhD in economics from the European University Institute of Florence. Now, without much further ado, handing over to you, Frank, really looking forward to you setting the scene and giving us a first perspective that we can then come back to with the subsequent speakers as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sigrid. Good morning to everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you. And let's say a part of our work, certainly, so the main purpose of our work is to ensure this employment and social dimension of the transition you are mentioning and highlight the scope and the need for just transition. I will give you a short presentation of main action in this area, and also, let's say, to what extent this could guide programming and activities also under the Just Transition Fund in particular. I would like to move to the next slide, please. And to start to say that, presenting the context, that Europeans are generally aware of the need for a green transition. More than 90% of Europeans believe that climate change is a serious and probably defining problem of our times, and that greenhouse gas emissions should be reduced. Also, a large majority of Europeans across all skill and age groups does see a personal responsibility in addressing climate change and helping tackle it. And if you, among more recent surveys among young people in particular, when asked about their their future perspectives, expectations regarding also labor market careers. They generally do highlight their wish that they contribute in a meaningful way to addressing the climate change. Really a lot of positive support here. Fairness and solidarity are defining principles of the European Green Deal. And our goal is to realize the opportunities that the green transition holds, while at the same time ensuring that no one is left behind. People and regions facing the greatest challenge are at the heart of this commitment. This includes regions that are the most carbon intensive or with the most people working in fossil fuel industries that are being phased out. And people living and working in these regions obviously deserve full support, as do people and households more generally affected by the green transition. We believe this is important as the transition will not be inclusive by default, but instead does need adequate accompanying policies in place so that which will help us to fully explore the potential and opportunities of the transition and address at the same time the risks and challenges. And this holds even more in the current context. And this is what the current slide tries to summarize. The initial start setting out the just transition dimension of the Green Deal from the start, leaving no one behind, transforming the EU into a sustainable, fair and prosperous society, summarized by the by now, I guess, famous quote of EVP Timmermans, where he said in Parliament, the transition has to be just or there will just be no transition. And all of this obviously is even more challenging, more important, more urgent now, given the new context, not only the recovery, inclusive recovery from COVID, but also the new geopolitical context in which we have to speed up that transition to gain energy security and independence. Next slide, please. Skills policies and policies to reskill, upskill the workforce are obviously one such key accompanying policy. This is the reason also why the Just Transition Fund dedicates particular attention to skills. To briefly recall, the Just Transition Fund regulation stipulates that the JTF should also cover the upskilling and reskilling, including training of affected workers, irrespective of whether they are still employed or have lost their job due to the transition. In particular, Article 8 on the scope of support envisages that the JTF supports, among others, the upskilling and reskilling of workers and job seekers. And coherent programming here requires mid and long-term foresight, immediate and longer-term adaptation, but most importantly, a balanced programming approach which covers all the relevant elements. Next slide, please. I would start with a short overview of why skills matter for a just transition, to share with you the evidence base. Next slide, please. So on the concluding evidence base, which is taken here from the staff working document, the analytical document, which accompanies our proposal of December 21 for a Council recommendation on ensuring a fair transition, something the first Fit for 55 package back in July last year required, to put more emphasis on the social and labor aspects of the transition. So in this summary, we have summarized the available evidence from impact assessments and studies known to us. The key message is that the effects of the transition and the challenges are not evenly spread across different regions, industries, workers, households, and consumers. At the same time, there is scope for what we like to call a triple dividend, which is to reduce emissions, create new quality jobs in the green economy, and also increase welfare of everyone through targeted measures and put everyone better off. We know, for example, that the transition could create up to 1 million new jobs by 2030 with the right policies in place. And here we certainly need a better understanding of what the green skills and green jobs are that are being created. Also what the restructuring needs are. There's significant needs for restructuring and for people moving to new tasks or new jobs within and across sectors. The same applies to energy poverty, which affects already today 35 million people in the EU, and better insights are here available on the impacts of access to essential services and also on the phenomenon of transport poverty and of the impacts of recent trends also on risks of energy poverty. Last but not least, we need, there's limited knowledge of granular and actual impact of transition policies and also of perceptions of green transitions and their fairness. And we believe that such knowledge, granular knowledge and evidence on actual impacts as we go along, based on data from stakeholders and from our own modeling and analyses, and on the perceptions of fairness, are important as to manage the transition. So in short, policies are at all levels, EU, national, regional, at firm level, are key for realizing these opportunities and addressing the challenges. Next slide, please. In the next slide, we do show you probably data evidence well known on the regional differentiation of the challenges and opportunities. This map shows on the left-hand regions, the darker the region, the higher the employment share in energy-intensive industries. And on the right side, for a selected number of regions only, with relatively high employment shares of above 5% of total employment in energy-intensive industries, we had a look at the participation in adult education and training. So the message here obviously is one of varying effects, as we said before, but also one that the share of adults participating in adult education and training is relatively low in those regions, and there's scope to accelerate this and increase the support. This also is in line with the headline target set for 2030 under the European Pillar of Social Rights Action Plan, which aims to increase by 2030 annual participation of adults in training to at least 60% from today, some 35%. So there's real scope for improvement, and obviously your action in that area can help a lot. Next slide, please. Another slide, another map I would like to show shows the varying challenges and opportunities across regions, also known to most of you, I guess. So the shaded, the encircled regions are those which are most affected, facing job losses due to the phasing out of coal and energy production and other relevant sectors, while the two maps on top and at the bottom, top for solar energy and at the bottom for wind energy, show you at the same time the job creation potential across regions for rolling out renewables faster. So the important message here is obviously that the set of challenge opportunities per region is unique, and that policies need to address the specific set in both challenges, phasing out job loss or restructuring on the one hand, while also having due attention to the job creation potential in those regions from new sectors here for renewables, but also for circular economy or other sectors, restructured industries, obviously, on the other. This is important also to mention this context. I guess I will leave it at that remark in my presentation today. In light of Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the related EU response, the EU leaders at the Versailles summit have tasked the Commission to come up with a so-called Repower EU plan, on which colleagues are working right now, and the faster rollout of renewables and the speeding up of independence of these fossil fuel imports is part of that, and obviously amplifies both the urgency and the extent of skills needed as part of the transition. Next slide, please. One word that these challenges obviously also differ by sectors. These are data taken from the impact assessments underlying the Fit for 55 packages across sectors, with the well-known finding that jobs will be lost in coal, oil and gas sectors and production to a large extent. The second part of the message in this slide, I think, is to say there's opportunities for job creation in many sectors, but you do see that there's a variation and that there are also risks, downside risks of job losses in sectors if we don't get policies right. Here again, the plea for just transition policies and for adequate reskilling, upskilling to support the transition to be on the right side, on the upper bounds of these estimated impacts of where jobs can be created, in particular in the construction sector, but also in electricity production and in energy-intensive sectors. Next slide, please. And one other important feature I would like to highlight in terms of evidence is that here we are comparing two scenarios based on work from Eurofound, a baseline scenario without accelerated energy policies on the left side, and on the right side a scenario with accelerated climate change and energy policies, which show you the job creation by quintiles according to wages and skills, so from low wage, low skill jobs on the left side to high skill, high wage jobs on the right side of the chart. And what we do like to stress is that we see in the green transition a potential to counter recent trends of labor market polarization and of creating jobs in the middle segment of the labor market, middle wages, middle skill, skill jobs, not in construction, renovation, but also many other sectors. And this is different from the impacts we see in many labor markets from trends like digitalization, which seem to hollow out middle part of this distribution. So here again, a good news, but again, one which highlights the importance of skill policies to provide these adequate reskilling on time. Next slide, please. A last slide to summarize the skill greens for transition. There's not yet a common definition at European level of what green skills or skills for the green transition are. Currently, managing authorities are obviously free to assess the needs on a local, regional, and national levels and create the appropriate adaptation strategies. CEDEFOP, the European Agency for Training, defines skills for the green transition as the abilities needed to live, work, and act in economies and societies which enable and support the minimization of the negative impact of human activity on the environment. So skills for the green transition include not only occupational sector-specific professional skills, for instance, expertise in renewable energy or energy audits, but also science, technology, engineering, mathematics, the STEM skills more generally, as well as soft and other transferable skills. Also, citizenship skills are important in this context, and therefore the Council has also issued a recommendation on education for sustainability to gear and support education systems more large, as everyone needs to change the way we live, learn, move, and work for the future. The Commission's approach to skills on the green transition is set out in the European Skills Agenda. This includes, for example, a new taxonomy which was published of skills for the green transition, which does identify these necessary skills, including specific and transversal skills. The taxonomy will provide an important reference point when it comes to designing and planning educational programs to skill people, upskill people for the transition. And last point I would like to mention here is that under the skills agenda and the Pact for Skills, more specifically aims at enhancing skills development in specific sectors by bringing together employers, workers, and public employment services in the areas I mentioned: renewable energies, agri-food, the automotive sector, construction and energy-intensive industries. And also under the industrial policy strategy, the Industrial Forum has a process of bottom-up to ask stakeholders what are the expected skill needs and what are workable, feasible transition pathways to put in practice. I would like to conclude with a short reference on the initiatives we have taken to promote a just transition and strengthen skills in the transition, which is complementary to the focus of the Just Transition Fund. The purpose of this recommendation, which I said was announced in the first Fit for 55 package in July last year, is to provide guidance to member states on how to exploit the benefits and opportunities with the green transition while leaving no one behind, how to address labor and social aspects of the transition. And this guidance is complementary with actions such as the Joint Transition Fund by providing guidance to member states for national level policies, including for the affected regions, by focusing more broadly on most affected people and households, including workers in affected regions, and also people already in vulnerable situations facing difficulties of access to the labor market, and by focusing on a broad scope of policies. So not only access to quality education and inclusive education and training, reskilling and upskilling, but also to put in place necessary social protection systems, temporary income support, and access to essential services, notably in energy and transport. Next slide, please. Without going into a lot of detail, this slide summarizes the structure and main content of the upcoming Council recommendation on ensuring a fair transition towards climate change. In the first building block, it has the policy packages I just mentioned across broad policy areas. In the second block, it looks at enabling conditions. It stresses the need to have a whole of economy, whole of society approach, engage all stakeholders, local and regional authorities, social partners, civil society, and mainstream policies, sufficiently mainstream the impact of climate energy policy, also in the area of employment and social policies, and to enhance our evidence base for just transition policies. We had hearings with many stakeholders in the run-up preparing this recommendation, and many told us, compared to the evidence I just proposed to you, to say it's great that you have these projections saying what employment impact will be in 2030 or 2050, but please also pay attention to indicate what are the impacts now. And I think that's a debate to be had with stakeholders, affected communities, involving also their inputs, obviously, as part of a fair transition. And last but not least, important in this context, it stresses the optimal use of public and private funding from a series of funds, obviously Just Transition Mechanism, Just Transition Fund, but also many other funds which go beyond the JTF and which are needed to support actions for just transition, the Recovery and Resilience Facility, the European Social Fund Plus, with a particular role for retraining, reskilling and upskilling, the ERDF and Cohesion Fund, Erasmus Plus, the Globalization Adjustment Fund, Horizon Europe, and many others. I would like to zoom in on one area, which is the recommendations in specific area of education and training. So to provide guidance to member states to ensure effective access to education and training during the transition, in particular for people in households in vulnerable situations. And this does relate to a number of areas which can provide inspiration of how the skills dimension can also be strengthened under the JTF, depending on the regional circumstances, including integration of transitions into national skills strategies, building skill partnerships, improve and conduct up-to-date skills intelligence, promote attractive, relevant, accessible education and training programs, including vocational education and training, provide, in particular for youth, support schemes for quality apprenticeships and traineeships with strong training components related to the greening of the economy. And last but not least, as I already mentioned, stimulate adult participation, upskilling and reskilling. Stimulate adult participation, upskilling and reskilling in line with the target set, and also recent initiatives on micro-credentials and individual learning accounts, which the Commission proposed. So these are some examples how the skills dimension could be strengthened in territorial plans under JTF, depending on circumstances. Apologies for being a bit long, but I hope it inspires debate, and we're happy, me and my colleagues in this call, to take questions and comments. Thank you very much.
Super, thank you. No, I'm sure it will inspire the debate, and thank you so much. I'm also aware that we started slightly later than programmed. However, I also know, Frank, you will be staying with us for the session, and I hope at the end of the session, once we have heard all speakers, we will be able to take one or the other question. So I'm going to leave it with you here now. I have two housekeeping points to make before I go to the next speaker. I'd like to encourage the audience to put in their questions in the chat function, and we will be looking at them, of course, and try to cover many of them. So don't hold back, don't wait until the last minute, do it now. And secondly, to the speakers, if you are using paper to read from, please be careful not to move it around over your desk too much, because it impacts the audio for the audience online. So with that, I'm going to introduce to you Sofia Sabova, who is project manager at the Regional Economic Development Agency Stara Zagora in Bulgaria. She has been focusing on energy issues since receiving her master's in European Studies from the University of Hamburg. And after finishing a master's thesis on Bulgarian energy policy, she focused on offshore wind energy in Germany and the Baltic region. So she's currently working on the just transition and the EU Green Deal topics as an expert, and she's here to tell us more about, several projects she's working on the topic, and giving us some, I think, first-hand examples of how things can be done and how they can work, offering some best practice to others in the room. So, Sofia, please, over to you.
Good morning, everybody. I'm really delighted to be part of this exciting event. And straight to the question, I'm Sofia Sabova, and I work for this agency, which is a partner within an Erasmus Plus project, which is dedicated to the topic of reskilling and upskilling, exactly in the direction of co-workers. Next slide, please. A little bit about the context. Well, decarbonization in the year 27 is going to lead to a loss of about 76 workers' jobs in the following 3 to 4 years, and this number is probably going to double until 2030. The partnering countries you can see on your right-hand side, these are Greece, Germany, Austria, Romania, Bulgaria, and Poland represent actually 81% of the total EU workforce in coal sector. And in this background, the job demand in the EU 27 in the rest sector is above 300,000 per year. So this is a huge gap open there. So the main idea of the project, next slide please, which is called Reskill project, reskilling co-industry workers for the renewable energy sector. And the main aim that the project has is to strengthen the VET providers in the energy sector, which are exclusively linked to co-workers for searching a competitive REC, renewable energy sector opportunities within this sector, and of course also cover in the same time the sector skill demand in the renewable energy sector. Next slide, please. About the timeline of the project, well, the project started in September 2020 with grasping the relief of the situation currently in the partnering countries. We started with learning outcomes, then we evolved and created a career reorientation toolkit, which is actually already available online. And now we're moving forward with creating learning units and open educational resources, which are going to be ready to the end of July this year. And the final step that the project envisages till the end of February 2023, the creation of Joint Competence Center, which is going to be a pilot action in Stara Zagora, Bulgaria, the region that I represent. And the idea is to implement all the materials that we have elaborated within the project in a real circumstances with the real learners. Next slide, please. Which are the objectives, actually? The first one, of course, is to develop a novel curriculum and tailored training content, which is envisaged to facilitate co-workers reorientation, and not to any industry, but to rest sector. The second one is namely the support to VET providers to integrate these materials that we have created within the project into their VET and WBL offerings. And as a third one, I would like to mention, of course, also to strengthen and to improve the link between the VET providers and also the business, because the business is the one that who is going to provide the opportunities and to enable co-workers in their transition towards the rest sector. Next slide, please. Yeah, which is the target group of the project? Of course, VET providers and all the training centers on the territory of the member states. Of course, co-workers, renewable energy employees and coal sector employees as well. Of course, social partners, and last but not least, public authorities and policymakers. And probably you're asking yourself how many people are going to be affected. We have calculated it, and it is slightly less than 200,000 people which are going to be affected in these 6 partnering country only. So, on the contrary of that, there is a very limited training opportunities in these countries. So you can understand why we consider this project as a cornerstone in our work. Next slide, please. What results do we expect to have? Like the first one is, of course, the learning outcomes for co-workers career reorientation, which are already available. A very important and significant part of our work was also elaborating the learning outcomes and the career reorientation toolkit. Currently, our team is working on those open educational resources which are going to be available in the 6 languages of the consortium. And of course, the last step will be to establish and to run the Joint Competence Center in Bulgaria. What do we achieve? We have achieved so far? Well, we developed an assessment tool to identify the learning pathways for co-workers. This is actually an online assessment form which is going to suggest the skills needed to be acquired and to strengthen the employability of co-workers in the renewable sector. Moreover, it offers to VET providers and the employees a tool for identifying the most appropriate learning pathways for the learners, and it indicates the most fitting profiles for the rest sector and proposing the optimal transition profile for each learner. Next slide, please. The developed resource that we also are proud of is the Reskill portfolio. This is an online tool for individual usage by co-workers as well, and this is something like a passport for their previous experience, knowledge, and it's aimed to demonstrate what they can actually. It describes the main tasks that the workers had, technical skills, responsibilities, knowledge, soft skills, and of course also digital skills. And at the end, it brings out something like a CV, which is specially designed for co-workers skill set. Next slide, please. Yeah, and just a couple of words about the context. Why are we doing that? And why is the Reskill project so important for us and also for the other partners? So just like an example, the perspective from Stara Zagora. In this region in Bulgaria, the biggest power plant fired by coal is located. This is the Maritsa East Energy Complex, and it consists of 3 lignite-fired power plants and, of course, mining companies, enrichment plants, and a briquette plant. It has a total capacity of 3,035 megawatts and a total area of 240 square kilometers. But the most important thing here is that over 16,000 employees work there directly, and they're going to be affected by the decarbonization process indeed. And there are estimations that the indirectly affected people are going to be over 50,000 in the region. So you can imagine how big the scale is and how important for our region is that the upskilling and reskilling of workers is an essential topic for the region for ensuring the just transition process. And the last point that I want to mention, for a long period there was no information about the co-phasing out for Bulgaria. Lately, the National Recovery and Resilience Plan came up with a year for phasing out of coal, and this is 2038. So probably it sounds a bit far away in the future, but this is not the case, because if you want to ensure fair and just transition in all the regions across Europe, we should have been started already. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'm open for questions.
Thank you so much, Sophia. That was really inspiring and amazing to see what is happening and what needs to be prepared still, but also indeed the tools that are available. I have a question actually on that, and it links to a question also that came in from the audience, from Judy Bournay. The question is, the green transition needs especially technical and transversal skills, like STEM, and that's also, I think, what you illustrated with your slides and with your presentation. But she asks, low and middle wage workers, can they or will they profit mostly? I mean, what tools are available for workers, ex-coal workers, after reorienting towards the RES sector?
Yeah, actually the idea is that those people who are currently engaged in the coal sector, it would be very easily for them to remain in the energy sector, but to transfer to the renewable energy ones. And that is exactly the idea of the project. And of course, for low qualified people, there will be offering for a very, very broad variety of courses, and they would have the option first to upskill if this is their will, and the second to to adapt their current knowledge within the coal sector to adapt it to the new circumstances of the renewable sector. So there are offerings from all the level of educational hierarchy, and I think it is up of everybody to decide how do they adapt to the new situations. But the most important thing is that they have a choice and offering and adequate support for that.
Okay, good, very clear. And I made a mistake just now. The question came from Kai van der Loo. Sorry for that. Thank you, Sophia. Also, you will stay. Hopefully, we can come back to you with one or the other question. I'd like to move on to the next presentation, which will be given by Dean Stroud, who is with Cardiff University School of Social Sciences and also co-coordinator of the Erasmus Plus European Steel Skills Agenda. He's a senior lecturer teaching and researching on skills and workforce development, particularly in relation to the European steel industry. He has led and participated in numerous projects funded from a range of sources, mostly European, which have focused on skills needs and also on technological innovation, greening, equality, diversity, and more generally, the human factors of steel production. I'd like to hand over, without further ado, to Dean to hear what he has to contribute to today's session. Thank you, Dean. Go ahead. I'm not sure we're hearing Dean.
Yep. I've made the fatal mistake, Sigrid, of leaving my mute on. Sorry.
Start again. Go for it.
Again.
Yeah, thank you.
So what I was saying was thank you for the introduction. Thank you for the invitation to speak today. And I will be speaking, albeit quite briefly, and discussing the important challenges facing the steel industry as it seeks to decarbonise its activities, and focusing on the jobs and skills implications arising from that challenge. Can we move to the next slide, please? What I have to say is mostly informed by 3 projects that I've had involvement in, and in the case of the ESSA project, continue to do so. First, I will outline the Steel Sector Careers Project, which was funded by the European Commission and researched the skills challenges faced by the European steel industry in terms of identifying and meeting future skills needs and exploring ways of recruiting talent to the industry. Then there's the European Steel Skills Agenda, a current project, or as it's known, ESSA, which has a similar remit to Steel Careers, also funded by the European Commission under Erasmus Plus, the Skills Alliance. And this is focused on developing working solutions to the skills challenges identified for the industry. And finally, I want to draw on a project preparing for a just transition, which was funded by the trade union in the UK community, which represents steel workers. And this explored technological innovation for a greener steel industry and addressed the skills challenges emerging for a socially just transition. So next slide, please. So the steel industry in the EU faces a number of challenges: global competition, dumping of steel, struggle to remain competitive, as well as the most recent challenges of recovering from the COVID-19 pandemic and the effects of conflict in Ukraine. But in skills and talents terms, what is perhaps a particular focus is the twin challenges of greening and digitalisation, and the need to decarbonise the industry and incorporate the opportunities presented by Industry 4.0 and the new digital technologies. On decarbonisation, there are various technological pathways identified to decarbonise and reduce CO2 emissions in the steel sector. And these are at different stages of development, but focus on incorporating hydrogen, green electricity, carbon capture and usage. In parallel, the emergence of the Industry 4 technologies contributes to the greening of the industry, for example, by helping to improve through things like sensor technologies, energy efficiency, water and water management and emissions control. But to meet the decarbonisation targets, there's a need to attract and recruit new talent and upgrade skills. And this is a reflection of a more general transition to high performance manufacturing informed by digitalization that's argued to increase the need for more highly skilled and qualified individuals. So, and that is not only in technical skills, but transversal skills also. And this represents a heightened risk of technological unemployment unless workers do upskill. So if we can go to the next slide, please. On green transition particularly, we find from the UK research with the trade union community and its members that while steel workers are on board with the green transition, they appear ill-prepared and little consulted, with areas of training neglected, a lack of skills among the workforce to support the green transition, and worries, and this is about just transition, about what the transition will mean for the future of their steel worker employment. So hence we have, whilst 92% of the current workforce view the transition as necessary, only half view themselves as possessing the necessary skills to support the transition. 41% feel threatened by the transition. Another 79% have not been consulted on the necessary changes, 78% expecting the transition to involve radical and disruptive technological change. So there's some real concerns there in terms of how the transition will take place. So the next slide, please. So as the industry develops technologically and in response to decarbonisation pressures, what we understand from the Steel Careers and ESSA projects is the need to recruit skills, as well as develop them from within the current workforce. So on this slide is what we find to be the most in-demand jobs in the sector. There's nothing new here in terms of new job profiles, and that's important to note, I think, based on the technological developments or decarbonisation as it is at present in terms of its progress. So it's the new technologies and demands of decarbonation and not yet disruptive in that way of creating new job profiles. It's more that the current jobs require new skills. And part of this is the solution is to upskill, which is the focus of the projects I've been involved in, as well as recruiting new talent. So next slide, please. So on this slide, I'm reporting from the ESSA project, which reports the skills, the 10 most cited skills from steel producers located in Germany, Italy, Poland, Spain, and the UK as our case study countries, with so-called green skills cutting across these various areas. And what the ESSA project finds more generally is a demand for what is termed T-shaped skills, both technical and transversal skills, of which both digital and green skills are part. If we can move to the next slide, please. So as a way of an example with regard to transversal skills particularly, which we are finding are becoming increasingly important in the adjustment to digital and green transitions, is the array of skills noted on this slide. And this particular case is for a metallurgical manager. And we might note the skills necessary in green skills terms for environmental awareness, energy efficiency, water conservation, waste reduction and waste management, resource use and recycling. So what we need to focus on, I think, is how we address those skill needs, how we address talent needs. So if we can move to the next slide, please. And this was the focus of the Steel Careers project, researching the skills and talent issues facing the industry. And the final report makes a number of recommendations to address them. So I've just drawn a few examples. So first, there's the call for more active skills monitoring. And what it's called for is a skills observatory that will monitor on a regular basis emerging skills needs, which would allow the EU and national policymakers to make informed decisions, allow education providers to adjust the curricula of educational programs accordingly, and allow companies to develop and implement better informed hiring and skill development strategies. And second, I'd like to talk about there's the pressing need to improve the image of the sector and careers within it, and this requires communication on the positive aspects of working in the industry. And this could be, for example, of showcasing its role now in the circular economy and its sustainability goals, stressing what are improved working conditions. And not bad working conditions, I mean relatively good wages, and the benefits of working in a safer, more automated environment than it once was, and prioritising these over what are the most often found to be the most difficult things about the industry: the noise, the dirt, the heat, the shift work, and those sort of things that won't attract young talent or seem not to have in the past. But we can present a better image for the industry. So there are a number of, I won't go through everything because I think time is short, but those are a couple of things that need to be addressed, as well as, say, for example, a repository on the job programs and practices at EU level to share good practice. The suggestion that companies explore opportunities for training partnerships with other companies, so working collaboratively. Workers need to understand better the importance of lifelong learning and engaging with training, all these sorts of things. The industry is also at threat of losing a large number of workers over the next 10 years, and there's a need for knowledge transfer of the good practices and the experience that's been built up over years of working in the industry. So these are important areas for addressing the skill needs of the industry as it begins the transition for decarbonisation and Industry 4.0. But I'd also like finally to end with something about the ESSA project and how the ESSA project begins to address some of what is recommended. And this is evident. So this is the next slide. Sorry, I forgot to say. Next slide. So this is evident in the development of the European Textile Technology and Skills Foresight Observatory. And the main parts of this are the demand side and the ESSA European Steel Technology and Skills Foresight Panel. And this will be focused on surveying emerging skill needs and utilising expert panels to identify sector trajectories in terms of technologies and skills. The other side of that is the Steel Hub, or online training ecosystem for the supply of skills, and this is operated by World Steel in conjunction with ESSA to deliver both technical and transversal skills through online training. And there's also a need to develop local infrastructures to support skills development at the level of the region by drawing in a range of actors, including training providers, educational institutions, steel sector bodies and firms, trade unions and others to provide supporting frameworks for meeting needs at the regional level and building sustainability in the form of regional training, of the regional training ecosystem. And of course, one last point I would want to make is that this all needs to be supported by social dialogue. It needs the involvement of both employers and employees' representatives to make this work, the just transition, and to support and ensure that work is decent. So on that, I think I'd like to end, and happy to take questions, Sigrid.
Super, Dean. I think you showed us some compelling figures there, really interesting to hear about this dimension of the transition and the change. I think it really illustrates also, to paraphrase what Frank earlier said, and I think he was quoting the Commissioner for Climate, Frans Timmermans, that there cannot be a transition without it being a just transition. And that probably means that we shouldn't only be talking about people, but with people, especially those concerned as well. And this may seem a no-brainer, but taking from your research and what you've just told us, it isn't, and it should be brought into policy much more. You've already given some ideas on that, but I'd like to probe you a bit more. In making what will be then the main obstacle? If you need to name one, where do you see the main issue, and how could perhaps both industry but also workers themselves play a role in facilitating that transition?
Well, steel has a real opportunity. I think it's recyclable, and that's an important part of sustainability. And there are new technologies and new innovations coming along that are going to push it in that direction. And it's tackling these issues through also being supported by regulation, and in that sense, the beneficial constraints of pushing the industry in the right direction. Now, that is all positive, but it presents obstacles to the industry to remain competitive, and the industry needs to remain competitive. When we talk about skills, they tend to be further down the agenda compared to the other priorities that there are within the sector, and we understand that. So the obstacle, I think, is as this transition happens, is making sure that skills and workers' priorities become as much of a priority as the other things that are pushing the industry. And I see, I guess, an obstacle there in the sense that the focus on skills and a just transition could be sidelined unless there is social dialogue, unless workers are taken along with the transition. That, I think, is beginning to happen, but I think when there are other priorities that the industry has, when there are other challenges, those sorts of issues can get sidelined.
Yeah, great to hear. And I don't know if I interrupt our technical support too much, but could I bring in Sophia for a moment on this one? Are you addressing any of these human dimensions or human elements also in the project that you have just shared with us? Do you recognize what Dean has shared with us?
Yeah, this is a central part of our work. As you mentioned, not talking about the people, but with the people, and this is very, very precious for us because we are located exactly in the core region. And of course, this is a sensitive topic for people, but for us, it's very important at least to provide reliable information to them, because the fake news are spread everywhere, and we take it as a mission just to at least to ensure reliable sources of information for them, and of course also to upgrade their options and support all the process of just transition, which of course is going to be a long, complicated, and kind of painful for sure. Yeah.
No, thanks. I mean, that's really filling with life the sentence, leaving no one behind. So
Exactly.
to take everybody on board, incredibly important, as it impacts so many people in different sectors. We're talking about steel here particularly, but also indeed coal, other energy intensive. Again, I'm myself very involved in automotive. I see the same issues there. Very, very important. And if I can just probe you a bit more, Dean, on the part that workers themselves can play, because one of your slides showed the number that about 40% of those surveyed did not really feel there would be more job security or really opportunities because of this green transition. But can or should we expect also a certain attitude or an amount of action from workers and employees themselves, or should it come from elsewhere? What's your view on that?
I've actually been reading about this recently, Sigrid, particularly through vocational education and training programs and what they can do to bring workers along. Often it's quite instrumental, the training. The training is about doing the technical aspects. But if we're going to look at a kind of socio-technical approach in relation to vocational education and training, as happens in some places across Europe, but not particularly in the UK, which is what I was reading about, is ingraining those messages within the vocational education itself. So I'm really talking about the new workers coming through. Of course, there needs to be, I think, an increasing profile on things like energy efficiency and circular economy within the industry itself to the current workers. But I think we can really begin to instill the values. I think when Frank gave the definition of green skills, I'm a bit skeptical about definitions of green skills, but if we're going to think of it in that sort of way, what does that mean? An important part of that, I think, is instilling values and instilling the values of greening and environment and efficiency within vocational programs to bring workers, the new workers along and make sure they're prepared for what will be a different industry to those currently working within the industry in 10, 20 years' time.
Thank you. Really interesting. And indeed, I think instilling these values might make it more pragmatic or more down to earth and lowering the level of abstraction that often goes with very nice sounding terms like greening or digitalizing. Yeah. I mean, what does it mean and how can we all be a part of that? Yeah.
Well, if I could just say, every job should be a green job. Yeah. And all skills, when they're applied, should be green skills.
Super, thank you. I'd like to move on to our next speaker. Hopefully we have time later on also to ask one or the other further question. Our next speaker is Aline Conchon. She is Senior Policy Advisor at Industry All Europe. That's the European Trade Union Federation of Manufacturing, Mining and Energy Workers. So many, I think, people covered and also many companies covered by that. She is coordinating Industry All Europe's activities in the area of vocational education and training. as well as of company policies, so policies aimed at supporting trade union action in multinational companies. She also supports the Training and Education Working Group of the European Sectoral Social Dialogue. I'm sure we will hear more about social dialogue from her in a minute. I saw her nodding already when the term fell during the conversation before. Last but not least, she holds a PhD in Sociology of Industrial Relations. Aline, looking forward to what you have to share.
Thank you very much, Sigrid, and thank you for the invitation. You made my day already. Indeed, I have to thank Dean as well for starting to put on the table what is kind of the elephant in the room, I believe. That is indeed that we have this idea in mind that there will be no transition if it's not with everybody being on board. Social dialogue is certainly key, and for us, it's still one of the missing points in all the discussion we could have, which is not just around skilling, reskilling, and upskilling. And I think that so I have many things to share with you, but I think that I will certainly center now my intervention on some key messages. To stress out why we will not achieve that just transition if we don't have workers on board, if we don't have trade union and employer association social dialogue on board, and if we don't have a comprehensive framework to approach just transition. I really much liked a lot Dean's presentation, and the figures are striking. We are talking about, so in Europe, we do cover 11 sectors. That's the industry. It's large. We are covering automotive sector, steel industry, energy, mining, textile, you name it. We are thinking daily about the future of no less than 30 million jobs in Europe. And the figures that Dean showed about the concerns of workers being very high and the greatest uncertainty they have about their future is there. The figures also that Dean showed about the fact that 80% of workers feel that they are not consulted about their future, their work, their career development, and their job. That's a reality that we face daily. I really want to insist on that first message that there will be no just transition if it's not by, with, for, in the interest of workers. Ultimately, the just transition will happen at the level of the company, on the shop floor, offices. I so agree with you, Dean, all jobs will be green jobs. And actually, all sectors have to decarbonize. So we are here in an event that have a kind of a narrow focus on some sectors only. The decarbonization is everywhere, and it's in every region. Of course, the impact will be different. Some sectors actually are more solution providing in the decarbonization process, but even those sectors, they need to be supported because we need them to be stepped up in order to embrace this decarbonization. There is two big risks if workers are not on board of all the discussion. And I have here to say that we find it a bit, for instance, shocking that trade unions in this high-level event are invited to talk here. I'm very happy to be invited on skills, but actually we have to talk about all the dimensions. You have a closing panel of the Just Transition Planning. It's people-centered just transition. I think the title, you don't have workers, you don't have that trade union organization represented there. So we have to have a voice, and the reason is, it's not just because we are so happy to be visible and appear on screen of everybody or come to meeting. That really is a point. First, I think the challenge is so tremendous. Frank stressed out that also with the current circumstances, we are accelerating further the need for a green transition that is intertwined with a digital transition. We are talking about a change that is massive. All sectors, all region, all job. It's all over Europe, and the change is on a very fast pace. So we have to change quickly. But then you have a major risk of backlash if you do that change quick, fast, in a way that is not managed with people not being on board. And we want certainly to accompany the transition and to have workers not just supporting it. Didn't you mention it? And that maybe is one point where I would disagree with you. You say we would need to have workers or their organization to support the process and implement the process. We don't want just to support, we want to shape it. And we want to shape it, and that is for me the second point, because if you don't involve workers and their trade union organization on board, we know well about our work, we know better about our industry, together with the employers, by the way, and I will come back to that point in a second. And it is because we know best that we are best placed to know what we want for the futures and how to have change a job to be adapted, and what is the skills that we need, and how to adapt curricula accordingly. And here I want indeed to stress that, of course, I am trade union organization representing industrial workers all around Europe, so I have to stress this out, but I also want to plea, and on this I definitely agree with Dean about the importance of social dialogue. And social dialogue, it takes 2 or 3 to tango. So it takes trade union organization representing workers, and it takes employers association representing companies. Here again, and I just take it as an indicator because it's not to be just critical, but look at the program of the Just Transition Platform meeting and try to spot among the speakers the employers association. In the automotive industry, for instance, we have a European Employer Association that is Tshaped that you won't see visible in the discussion. You have a European Employer Association in the steel industry that Dean mentioned that is not visible. Social dialogue, it takes 2 to tango, and 3 because we definitely need also the support of and dialogue with the public authority. And again, it's not just because I want to plea for our old school way of doing things, it's because the social dialogue works. We have the knowledge and we know how to process with changes. Here again, I insist on the fact that the changes that we are confronted with, they are massive, fast-paced, but it's a change. And in the past history, I mean, all think about the automation wave that took place in the 70s. We put in place instruments based on social dialogue to be able to accompany the change. And it still is the case. At the moment we are talking, you already have plenty initiatives at national level in different sectors of social partners in order to get ready, because I would also kind of agree with Sophia. We are a bit late if we believe we have to do and start doing things now. We, the trade unions and the employer association, in many situations, we have not waited for now. We have already started to prepare the future. I can give you one example, for instance. And in Italy, last year, we have a amazing manifesto that was signed by the social partner in the energy sector. So that was Confindustria, FIM, FIOM, Wiltec, and that is a manifesto about labor and energy for a sustainable transition. That's just a one-pager, easy. You have a look at it, and then you could understand what I mean when I said that we want to shape the change, because skill is there, and reskilling and upskilling is one of the dimensions and one of the solutions of the changes, and we have to work on it, but it's only one point. Because in all the process, you have to think strategically. You look at this manifesto from our Italian colleagues and social partners, you will see that it first starts with thinking about what do we want for our industry. So what is the strategy for the energy sector in Italy that we want? And from this, you derive what is the instrument we need, what are the policy framework, what is the funding, and then you go on and how we implement the change. You have social dialogue and how we implement security and ensure we have a job-to-job transition for workers, so we avoid a transition where workers first go to unemployment before maybe finding another job, and that's exactly what we want to avoid. And here you will see in this manifesto that skills and reskilling is there, but it's just one of the solutions and one of the instruments for job-to-job transition. I want really to put it clear, our message here is, if you don't think strategically, and I certainly appreciate that sometimes there is this understanding of, okay, maybe we just keep these social dialogue bits because it takes a bit of time, or maybe we don't have this strategic thinking about first asking ourselves what it is that we want for our industry, and we just start developing short, tailored or not tailor-made actually training skills to learn how to develop an app, for instance, that will take only 3 hours of training for one worker in one region. But if you take this in a rush, not thinking through, not strategically approach manner of reskilling and upskilling, you're going to miss your target. And this is the reason why I want to insist on this approach we have at Industrial Europe, and really timely event, because for us, we also have a next step next week. We are launching our own manifesto for a just transition. And in that manifesto, this is where we explain those ideas that you need to have a comprehensive framework. Just transition, again, it's all sectors. It's not just some. It's all region. It's not just some. It's all workers and all jobs. And for this, we need industrial policy. So we need that strategic thinking for every sector, what is it that we want. We need funding. I very much appreciate Frank's explanation of the funding available. We certainly welcome the fact that the European Union is putting money on the table. I'm very concerned this is not proportionate to the challenge ahead of us. We need social dialogue, and social dialogue, I'm very sorry, is not functioning well enough in many countries and in many sectors, and we need to step up and build up again strong collective bargaining in particular if we want it to work. We want reskilling and upskilling if you're thinking strategically, and we want, and that might be my last point, we want workers to be on board. So we need that information, consultation, dialogue at company level, at sectoral level, at national level, so we can be part of the transition. And for us, it's really is key. Bear with me that I'm really insisting on skilling is important, but it's just one tiny element, and it would be very wrong to believe that workers would only play a role in transition by going to training. We have to have a much broader approach and a more comprehensive approach. Thank you.
Loud and clear, Aline. Thank you very much. I think that was not just a very clear, but also a passionate plea to everybody, basically. I'd like to ask you one follow-up question. It also seems to stir a bit of interest and understanding in our audience today. Question from George Stiff. In talking about giving workers a voice, and I strongly agree, he says. However, I would also ask who should be involved so that we're not talking just about them, but also with them. Is it sufficient to get trade union representatives, or would it actually be feasible to get trade union members? So, workers on, or he says, under the ground, that might be able to generally discuss these issues at higher levels that is often needed. So how do you view that, Aline?
We do have, of course, that direct connection, and as every time we have the opportunity, we have our members giving a voice. In a panel session that was right before ours, you had my colleague Giacomo that indeed was able to give our view about the youth dimension of the transition. The thing is, we are talking here about 30 million jobs. So I'm more than happy that we have 30 million workers coming to a European Commission high-level event. Lucky for the European Commission, you have representative organizations which are not disconnected from the reality of work. What I report when I take the example of our colleagues in Italy are initiatives which are based on dialogue with worker representatives on the ground. And that is one of the reasons why we do believe that we need to have stronger rights for workers and their representative on the ground, shop floor, at the workplace to take part in the discussion. We have at the European level, we have some framework and legislation for workers' involvement at the workplace. They are way too weak. They are not operating properly, I must say. And also, so far, they are not centered on transition and decarbonization topic. And that is what we need nowadays.
Okay. Oh, thanks. Dean, maybe very briefly also for you to come in on this question. Do you have a... You're muted again, Dean.
You think I'll be used to this by now. Yes, what that question, the way that question struck me was based on some of the research I've done recently around technical innovation, and the involvement therein of works councils. And I think consultation can come in a number of ways to involve workers, but it's what I think is of huge benefit when workers are involved is that you get more out of the transition, you get more out of the progress you're trying to make. So if I can draw on my research, particularly we were looking at the use of drones in the steel industry, and when we spoke to workers about their use, it was the workers that properly understood how you could get the best out of these innovations, how you could, rather than, I would say, management, which in some of the plants were actually had a more productive ethos, were worried about production being stopped for the introduction of innovations. And it was workers that really understood the benefits of innovation, the benefits of transition, in this case of Industry 4.0, and the real effects of new technologies and what decarbonisation will mean for the industry. And their voices, and it picks up on Aline's point, it's then about shaping rather than just supporting. And it's through that understanding that helps shape the transition in a positive way.
And for me, that really nicely also links back to the actual topic of today's session. It might not be the only solution, reskilling and upskilling, but it's certainly an important dimension, right? I think we need all these different dimensions indeed to bring this transformation about. I'd like to move now to Frank and to see if you've listened to everything said. There were some very, I think, pertinent points brought to the fore. Just to have your feedback on what you've heard and what struck you maybe most in what the others shared so far.
Thank you very much for giving me the floor again. I think all points were relevant, and I hope I tried to stress at least that I do believe that many of these aspects are reflected in what we're trying to do with this recommendation. This may not yet be the comprehensive policy framework Aline is calling for, but at least it does stress, let's say, the need to look at all these issues, comprehensive policy packages, of which skills is one. I focused on it given the title of the session and the link with the programming here. But yes, obviously, job-to-job transitions, providing income support, involving everyone is key. So I, very briefly, if I may react to some questions, I saw some on the question on the job skill levels for which jobs will be created in the green transition. I think the message there is across all skill levels. We try to highlight that in the middle skill segment, there's more job creation, there's more positive the outcome than without actions. What would be the counterfactual without this? But so this is across all sections, and all skills are needed, not just STEM skills. In this was a point made before. Also on the human dimension, we are DG, which has social in the title of our mandate and of our DG. So yes, this is very important to us, and many issues were mentioned, many tools. Would probably like to say also in the research area, where with this research on new technologies for greening and so on, we try to instill and to motivate that this research looks at changing skill requirements, looks at what workers expect or consumers, technological and social innovations geared to their needs, and also behavioral aspects. As we said, a lot of this greening is about behavioral change of consumers and producers. And this is not something we can legislate on. So we can set incentives, we can provide enabling frameworks, but this has to be shaped together, as was mentioned before. I also agree very much with the point I think made again by Aline most forcefully, probably, that this focuses on all jobs. Just transition is about all jobs. That's why our recommendation, it focuses on those most affected by the green transition, but not only. It's about all categories, all in vulnerable situations, and not everyone will move to green job immediately without knowing exactly what this is maybe, but there are also jobs in the transition, there are jobs in the care sector and the social economy, and all are equally relevant and equally important as part of this transition. It is about labor market integration more broadly. I made my point on the policy packages, on those who to speak to. 13 million is hard to, even if we go back to presence meetings, hard to accommodate, but we speak to all. Obviously, we are willing and we are actively supporting social dialogue in all its forms, involving social partners in impact assessment so that they can contribute to shaping policies, so the diverse voices are heard in the implementation, programming, which is important in this session, but also support autonomous action if social partners want to take it as part of our EU policy action, obviously. So yes, there is a role for representatives, obviously, which is enshrined in the treaty, but we also seek direct contact with communities, and I mentioned that before. I think this is part of the dialogue, which is important. We will try to improve that also over time. I don't know whether this is the right place to say. I always have a rapper from Germany in my mind, a rapper who is from one of the regions affected by phasing out of the coal transition, and who has made a song about this, asking basically policymakers to give a perspective to the transition. So while he has been working in the sector, he admits the challenges and the hardships this can bring, but he also admits that there's no other option out. And I found that interesting, for example, so why not engage with someone like this, and why not make everyone's voice part of this dialogue to get people along to shape awareness was mentioned. And the last point I would like to mention, because these perceptions are so important, perceptions of fairness. We don't want to shape perceptions only. We obviously want to ensure a fair, just transition, but it also has to be perceived as such and respond to the needs. And I would like to bring this back to the, let's say, survey results, which showed some concerns or criticism or maybe low expectations there. And I think our colleagues from DG Regio who are shaping this event are best aware of a publication they did a few years ago on the geography of discontent, which showed how in certain regions discontent can grow, even discontent in overall probably positive employment labor market situation at the time. And I read this as basically summarizing that what is most, it's not, people are not against change. People are aware of change. They're willing to invest. It's not only about reskilling, but I think there's largely awareness and willingness to participate, and they want to contribute to the process. But there's also a historical memory, and there are also memories of what could have gone maybe not so well in the past. And I read that paper by saying regions which were subject to repeated restructuring exercises, which left, let's say, some question marks on whether it was managed the best way. These are those where probably these perceptions are the most negative or expectations lowest. But that's also where we have to, let's say, focus a lot, because we don't have many tries this time. So given the urgency, given the way we have to move forward fast, we have to showcase real benefits for people, for workers, for sectors concerned. And I'm grateful for the many good ideas and projects you have and how to do that.
Perfect. No, thanks. And I think we can all agree with that. I'm coming to you, Aline, in a second. I just want to bring in my last question to all of you. And Frank, you already alluded to it a bit in your introductory remark. And this is the current environment that we find ourselves in, right? The current events. And that links a bit to your concern also about people that have to go through subsequent transitions or even disruption. And we see that currently with supply chain disruptions, with the war in Ukraine, with inflation rising quite extraordinarily, security of supplies, but also people really worrying about their environment, and they were already in this transition. So how do current events, that's my question to all of you, and I ask you to be brief because we have in total 7 minutes left. How do current events impact the social dimension even further, and what is the main concern you may have, or the main advice you may want to pass on to the audience today, bringing in that topic? I'll start with Sophia, please.
Yeah, I would say that the reaction of the events recently in Bulgaria are like this is probably going to bring coal up. So the idea of coal being the winner in this situation is a little bit frightened in the context of the Green Deal, but still these are the voices that are being heard, that indeed the recent events with the war in Ukraine is going to slow down the processes, and the rescue and the saving the only saving and the only pathway in the future is going to be coal, which is a little bit frightening for the situation.
So direct impact immediately there already in the discussion.
And,
Okay, good. Aline, over to you. And again, also request to be brief, please, so that I can give the floor to the others as well.
I'll do my best because that's a really tough question. But I think indeed there is a massive risk after having a decarbonization and the green transition slowing down and being stalled because of the current circumstances. If we speak specifically on skills education and training, we've seen that in previous crises before. Training budget is one of the first one to be cut by companies that want to save cost. And right at the moment, we need that massive reskilling and upskilling efforts. That's exactly what we should not do. Second point, also because of the current circumstances, I think that we have to be very careful with how we present just transition to workers, because we have a lot of million of people concerns, and if the message is go on training or you will lose your job, we will not get people on board. And that is another reason why I'm saying if the message is we have prepared training for you, you were not part and involved in designing it, you have no role played in the future of your job, your industry, but go on that training and we'll see what happens, and finger crossed, it won't fly. So again, we have to have this involvement of workers and their organization all along the process. Okay,
very clear. Dean, your perspective, and don't forget to unmute. Thank you.
I did it. But Aline covered a lot of what I might have said, actually, I think. But if I can look at this question a little bit more broadly, I think, we've had the pandemic, we've got cost of living crisis, we've got conflict in Ukraine. I think we need to look again at the post-political consensus. I think we need to address neoliberal frameworks and ways of doing things. I think we need to involve young people more. I think we need to turn to away from the blah, blah, blah that Greta Thunberg might talk about, and really engage with social movement groups and the radical solutions that they might offer, and think differently about how we progress society in view of the wider kind of challenges that we face as a society. Shall I leave it at that?
Thank you. And Frank, we heard the word proportionate before. The measures that also policymakers can deliver should try to be proportionate to the challenges around us. That's a tremendous task, I would say. But any last views from your side before I close?
Yes, so I think, as you know, we're working on the Repower EU plan to come out soon, so that will be part of that reply on what to do. I agree with what Dean said, that we are living extraordinary times, extraordinary challenges. But as the IPCC report shows, the climate change does remain probably the main crisis we have to do. We have responded to the other ones, COVID, the war, or the challenge, by maintaining the cap, by deciding to accelerate the green transition. We feel there's public support for this, even increasing support. But this obviously means that we need to address a lot of issues. Reskilling has to be even faster to roll out renewables, to speed up permittal procedure in many areas. So it's a joint effort really needed, and I fully subscribe to the point made by Aline on this. Also to support those affected companies, supply chain disruptions which could happen, and the households because of energy price rises which are there and which will not, I cannot make any predictions, but which are expected to stay there for some time. And there are also food price rises and others, as was mentioned. So, and there the Commission has stressed the importance of these emergent actions member states have taken, which were laid out in the energy price communication last year, which have helped more than 70 million people, consumers, to protect them against this. This has to be maintained. And the last conclusion, I think, is it highlights even more the need for just transition.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, thank you to all in the panel. It's been a very fruitful discussion. Thank you for your contributions. I think we touched on the need for reskilling, upskilling, and how it can be done, but we went beyond that because it's not just about that. The dimensions are much broader. We discussed the need to not just talk about people concerned, but with very much also with them in various forms, whether bringing them in here to demonstrate in front of the Berlaymont or indeed having them involved in all kinds of discussions. Very useful also looking at the current events that are making things, I think, even more challenging, the need for social dialogue, to have all partners around the table that have a role to play in this transformation. So good to see that there are many policy instruments already in place, but also that they should be rolled out to other sectors. Cross-sectoral thinking, I think, is very important. Co-creation, ecosystems. I could mention a couple of more buzzwords. So thank you again, everyone, and to the Just Transition platform for hosting this important event. I hope you have many nice and inspiring takeaways from today, and looking forward to continuing the discussion and the debate. Thank you very much.